In 1987, when two teenage girls are murdered in Thunder Bay, Canada, the police fear the worst.
I immediately thought that we had a serial killer working the area.
Police think they've got their man, but a psychic says they're wrong.
I feel terrible, but I had to tell him I'm having trouble recognizing the face I see.
In the public's mind, it was going to be sort of a miracle if anybody was caught because so much time had elapsed.
Then, 13 years later, a stone-cold case comes back to life. Was the psychic right all along?
I knew I had seen that face so clearly.
On the shores of Lake Superior sits Thunder Bay, Ontario, Canada. In the 1600s, a fur trading post. Today, a struggling industrial town. On Sunday, May 10th, 1987, Mother's Day, an elderly couple out on their morning walk discover the body of a young woman laying in a gravel pit. First to arrive on the scene is Constable Jerry Moran of the Ontario Provincial Police.
The body was located right in the area here. The top had been pulled up and her jeans were undone. Her shoes were removed and laid beside the body.
Police comb the scene and find a plastic bag containing a beer bottle and what appears to be the undergarments of their victim.
The thing that was going through my mind at the time was somebody's Mother's Day had been ruined for the rest of their lives.
But Detective Moran has a job to do and puts his personal feelings aside.
You treat it very businesslike. You're detached. Any short-lived evidence, anything that weather could destroy, we have to try to preserve that as fast as possible.
At the scene, police also find shoe prints and tire marks. The young woman is identified as 17-year-old high school student Donna Tebenham.
The body of 17-year-old Donna Tebenham was found yesterday afternoon in a gravel pit north of the city. As for details, that's about all the OPP is releasing so far.
The circumstances surrounding it dictates that we are or have forwarded the body to the Center of Forensic Sciences in Toronto for expert examination.
Donna Tebenham was your typical 16-year-old girl. You know, she went to school, she had friends.
Julio Gomes is a local journalist for the Thunder Bay Chronicle.
I've lived all my life in Thunder Bay, and at the time I was a teenager as well. And I know my own feeling was one of shock.
An autopsy reveals she died of asphyxiation. There were small traces of alcohol in her body, but no drugs. A sample of semen is also recovered. Another curious clue. Tiny specks of blue paint were lifted from her clothing.
The blue paint was at one point used on a specific year of pickup trucks. Anybody that wanted to paint their vehicle could have painted it that blue, but we had established based on the wheelbase and the axle width that it was a truck.
Police learned that Donna had spent the previous evening visiting friends. She was last seen walking back from a local corner store at about 11 p.m. Calls from the public kept police busy, but brought them no closer to a suspect.
We had so many suspects, or what could be considered persons of interest, but as it turned out, in all the cases, it was a dead end. People would come forward and just say that they have reason to suspect this person because they said something. They said they may have seen this girl at a party, or they said that they went to school with this girl and they've done things to this girl and things like that. They were blowhards at a party, most of them, that would just want to get attention for themselves and admit to doing anything. And all these guys were subsequently ruled out as suspects.
Another snag. Partial fingerprints found on the beer bottle at the scene turn up no matches. With no suspects, and with no DNA testing in 1987, the semen sample sat on the shelf. The most promising clue police had appeared to be the blue repaint chips found on the body, but record-keeping back then was less exact. Tracking down a blue repainted truck had to be done by sight.
In this particular case, we were looking for a travel or an international travel truck. It's like an old Chevy Suburban. So there weren't too many of them around. So we were tracking those things down, and we spent months looking for everybody that was registered or had ever owned one of those. And so that's all time consuming.
Thunder Bay is a small town, and there are unfortunately a lot of other unsolved murders that take place, and every couple of years you'd have someone that disappears and they're never found.
Then, Friday, August 7th, another body is spotted off the side of the road just a few miles from where Donna Tebenham was murdered 3 months earlier. The second victim is another Thunder Bay High School student, 16-year-old Bernadette LeClaire.
We were supposed to go dancing. I didn't hear from her. I knew something was wrong.
David Binquist was Bernadette LeClaire's boyfriend at the time she went missing.
And I was just happened to be flipping through the newspaper, and they had a little article about a native girl found in the power lines. My heart almost jumped out of my chest.
The crime scene appears chillingly familiar to Constable Moran.
The victims were the same age. There was no obvious signs of violent death, but there was a plastic bag put over her head.
Shoe prints and tire tracks match the Donna Tebenham scene. Police also make another key discovery.
We found blue repaint chips on both bodies. I immediately thought that we had a serial killer working the area.
Then police get a promising lead. A woman walks into the station and says she knows who the killer is. She claims her boyfriend, who we will call Ron Newman, picked up a woman at the same corner store where Donna Tebenham was last seen the night she went missing.
She was allegedly an eyewitness to the actual apprehension.
So the police questioned him, and then they arrested him. And he was charged with 2 counts of murder.
Attorney Lee Begg had been working on Ron Newman's case since the day the arrest was made. Police fingerprint Newman, but the prints don't match, and he doesn't drive a blue truck. But police aren't giving up so easily.
We couldn't rule him out as a suspect just due to the fact that his prints didn't match what was found at our scene. He could have been wearing gloves. He could very well not have touched anything.
Nobody minds defending a guilty person. But when it's an innocent person, the task becomes so much more serious, but you dare not make a mistake.
And police would learn that they had made a big one. At a preliminary hearing, the OPP's case against Ron Newman falls apart.
Well, she just didn't withstand cross-examination to the extent that the Crown had absolutely nothing to go on. There was no connection between my client and the murders whatsoever.
Finally, after spending 6 months in jail, the charges are dropped.
He was released, but unhappily for him, there was no one else to point the finger at.
We weren't defeated. We were still interested in pursuing the case, albeit from a different angle.
That different angle was a psychic.
One evening I was watching a documentary that involved a woman by the name of Noreen Rainier.
The use of psychics in police investigations is commonplace, but in Canada, almost unheard of. Will the psychic lead the OPP to a brutal serial killer?
I saw so clearly the face of the murderer.
In Thunder Bay, Ontario, the murder of 2 teenage girls has the city demanding answers. Police have a suspect, but not enough evidence to convict. Desperate for clues, a cop calls a psychic.
She had been successful with several American agencies, so I thought we had nothing to lose.
Noreen Rainier is a psychometrist who specializes in missing persons and homicide cases.
I like touching something off the victims, and metal is better for me. It seems to be a better conduit. It holds the energy or images of what that individual saw just before he or she was killed.
Detective Moran sends her a pair of earrings found on Donna Tebenham, as well as a necklace from Bernadette LeClaire.
When I first start a case, I have to prove to the police that I'm real. And so I always tell them a few things they already know, usually how the person was killed, what he or she looked like, or when they were alive, a few things like that to gain their confidence in me as a credible psychic. And then they can ask questions, and my mind just sees what they ask.
Yeah, I felt a little weird about the whole thing. I'd never been involved with a psychic. I'd never even been to a tea reader, but I figured, if it works, who am I to argue with it?
Like most of her cases, Noreen conducts her reading with Moran over the phone.
When I held Donna's earring, I remember seeing her sort of light brownish hair, and I feel she had problems with her S's. I see braces.
She described the victims very accurately, right down to the speech impediment on Tebenham and the character of LeClaire.
I had Bernadette's necklace, so it wasn't that difficult to be able to describe her. I felt more fuller lips. I felt more feisty, confident, a little bit rebellious, again young.
Then Noreen astounds Moran by describing the murder.
Remember, I couldn't breathe. Screaming. I'm having trouble breathing. Didn't feel any knives or guns or wounds of that sort, just not breathing.
It started, being a little unusual that she would know some of this stuff, and I certainly wasn't given this information to her.
Again, I closed my eyes, and I could feel, first of all, I felt a truck, and it was blue, it was low, and it had sort of a flat thing in the back of it.
I was somewhat surprised because that's the color of the vehicle we were looking for, based on the paint chips found in both scenes.
The eyes. I'm seeing the eyes now. On a face, when I close my eyes and I'm trying to describe the murderer, I don't see the whole face at one time.
But the whole face is what the police need, so Noreen sets up a circle group hoping to get a clearer picture of the killer.
I'm seeing an eye. A circle group is people with like minds. We're all hopefully trying to get the same answers. I was teaching at the time, ESP course, and some of my students had heard about the case that I was working on, and they wanted to become involved in it and help me see more. Large ears, more closer to the head. It was so clear. I saw it so clearly. I knew that if I had my artist draw it, that we would have a face for Constable Moran.
She subsequently got a hold of a sergeant from an American police force that had worked with her before, and based on her description, he drew a composite sketch of what she thought our suspect should look like.
Length. There was just a small space between the upper lip and the nose. I made a photostat copy of the sketch and sent it to Constable Moran and waited to hear what he had to say.
When I got the Polaroid picture of the composite sketch, it didn't look like anybody in particular that we had looked at.
Nothing. They didn't know who it was. I was devastated. I felt so like I was on, and he didn't know who my face was. I was just totally devastated.
It looks like another dead end, but Moran is not willing to give up just yet. He sends the psychic a stack of photos, including the photo of Ron Newman.
I didn't really recognize anyone in the lineup. I felt terrible, but I had to tell him I'm having trouble recognizing the face I see.
At that point, I was somewhat disappointed, but I knew that there was no point in pursuing something that wasn't there.
But before the cop gives up on the psychic, he has one more question.
Will we get him, and when will we arrest him? And I said, yes, he's going to be 32 years old. He's going to have a mustache. And I saw the initial R. I didn't know if it was first or last name, but I saw R.
Moran is stumped by Noreen's clues. Ron Newman was 32 years old, and he had the letter R in his name, but the psychic's sketch looks nothing like him.
The description that she made, really, it was a stretch to make it fit Newman.
The last conversation I had with Constable Moran was when he sent me the lineup of the faces, and that was the last time we spoke.
At that point, the case didn't go very much further. I was taken from the case and put back on general duties because there was no other avenues of investigation to pursue.
I question my ability. How could I see so clearly and it be so wrong? What was wrong? My mind, what was happening?
The case goes cold. 2 16-year-olds are dead and their killer is still out there. Police run occasional Crime Stoppers television spots, but no new leads surface.
It always seemed like they were at a dead end, and that really in the public's mind, it was going to be sort of a miracle if anybody was caught because so much time had elapsed.
In fact, 13 years go by. Then science steps in and reignites a cold case and confirms a psychic's long-forgotten vision.
How could I be so wrong when I had seen so clearly?
In Thunder Bay, Ontario, the murder of 2 teenage girls remains unsolved. 13 years pass, and then a breakthrough in fingerprinting technology offers new hope to cold cases. In August of 2000, an automated fingerprint identification system known as APHIS was upgraded to search and retrieve both finger and palm prints of convicted felons.
This led to numerous cases being cleared up, and one of them was the Tevin M. LeClaire case.
Partial prints found on a beer bottle and a plastic bag at the scenes could now be compared against pools of fingerprint records. APHIS turns up a hit, and the owner of the prints is Larry Runholm. In 1990, 3 years after the murders, Larry Runholm, a native of Thunder Bay, had been arrested and charged with drinking and driving. His fingerprints were forwarded to the RCMP and remained on file for 10 years, until the new technology made the match. A case that has baffled cops for 13 years is finally solved. On July 11th, 2000, Runholm is charged with the murders of Donna Tevenham and Bernadette LeClaire.
It was a huge story when he was arrested because the community had almost forgotten about these deaths, and the few people that still remember it had almost given up any hope that anyone would ever be arrested and held to account for it.
The arrest finally vindicated a psychic who 13 years earlier accurately described both girls, their dark hair, Donna's braces, and Bernadette's feisty personality. She even envisioned their deaths.
I'm having trouble breathing.
But it was her sketch of the killer that police turned a blind eye 2 years ago that now came back to haunt them.
The profile provided by Noreen Rainier regarding a suspect turned out was amazingly accurate. At the time of the murders, Mr. Runholm was only 19. We have a high school photograph, Mr. Runholm. The prominent nose, the full mouth, the length of the hair.
Other puzzling clues offered by the psychic now seemed to make sense as well.
I remember Constable Moran saying, "Will we get him, and when will we arrest him?" And I said, yes, he's going to be 32 years old. He's going to have a mustache. And I saw the initial R. I didn't know if it was first or last name, but I saw R. So I was overjoyed that my information was right. Sad that it didn't help in a timely manner.
Runholm admits to intentionally killing both girls and avoids a jury trial by pleading guilty to second-degree murder.
And Larry Runholm never took the stand, never explained anything. His lawyer said he has no memory of what happened, so he has nothing to offer.
Runholm claims he can't remember what happened back in 1987 when the girls, both 16, were believed to have been raped and then suffocated 3 months apart. But Justice Stanley Carisco, in his sentencing address, says he saw no evidence of amnesia, and he says the families deserve an explanation for these sickening murders.
You know, the guy is a vicious killer, sadistic, and the judge saw through him, and I'm very thankful for that.
To this day, the police don't know exactly what happened the nights the two girls went missing. What they do know is that both girls were suffocated with a plastic bag. DNA testing of semen taken from both girls matched Larry Runholm, and blue paint chips found on both girls matched the paint and make of the truck he drove.
Why did he do it? And how could he live with himself for the next 15 years, where ostensibly he was raising a family and leading a normal life? It's one of those just baffling things that you constantly think about and say, you know, what really happened?
His plea of second-degree murder carries an automatic life sentence.
The ruling of 20 years came as some satisfaction and closure for the families of the victims.
Second-degree murder for two girls. I would have liked to have seen, 22, if not a little bit more. But I am pleased it's over.
There was a certain amount of uncertainty that we had stepping in here today and just wondering where the judge was going to end up. So at 20 years, I think my sister was well served.
Look at how many lives he's destroyed. I don't think he got what he deserves. But I know he'll get what he deserves where he's going.
If the police had used the psychic sketch in their investigation, would the murders have been solved sooner? An article published a few weeks after Runholm's arrest revealed that police did have him in their sights, but he was somehow overlooked.
He had lived on a road with his parents, and his parents were away all summer at a tourist camp, which they ran. And so he had the run of the house, came and went as he pleased. His house was on the same route that myself and my partner did a door-to-door knock on. And as it happens that the one side of the road that my partner was on was the same house that Mr. Runholm lived in. And he wasn't home the two times we went there. But at that point, we had no reason to suspect Mr. Runholm with anything. He was just another name to be cleared.
The police just using me is right, but they are not used to working with psychics, so they don't understand how we work and how they have to interpret our clues. It's not all factual the way in this reality. My goal, and still will be till it happens, is to train and teach the detectives how to do what I can do.
In hindsight, the clues that Miss Rainier provided, although we were disappointed that we weren't able to successfully charge suspect number one, it did prove to be very accurate for suspect number two, although 13 years down the road. I'm glad I used the psychic because it sort of opens up a whole new avenue of investigation. We had nothing to lose by using her and everything to gain.
How dare I had doubted my own psychic ability. So, yes, I was joyful in knowing that my ability was working and does work. And again, like faith, don't doubt, believe.
A lazy summer day at the lake turns to panic.
I said, "Where's Tom?"
When a 5-year-old boy disappears.
I wondered if he was dead.
Police think he's drowned, but a local psychic says he's lost in the forest.
I could see this little boy lying under a very large tree.
Is the psychic right? Is Tommy Kennedy alive or dead? Empire Lake in picturesque upstate New York, a favorite spot to spend a summer afternoon, especially in the mid-70s.
It was a place where people could go and relax, or bring their picnic lunches and have a nice time.
But for Mary Kennedy, Empire Lake brings back memories of a day she will never forget. On a hot summer day in 1975, Mary Kennedy and her family head to Empire Lake to spend the day swimming.
My fiance and his two daughters, Siri and Lisa, and my two sons, Ben and Tom, we decided to go down to the lake and give the children a chance to cool off.
After swimming, Fred takes the kids for a nature walk.
It was all four of the children. I really don't remember why I didn't go.
Fred and the kids disappear into the woods.
While everyone was hiking, I was lying on the blanket, enjoying the day. Knowing me, I probably had a book with me.
But that enjoyment was about to end.
I see Fred and the children coming towards me. Everybody was sweaty and happy, and I don't see Tom.
Tommy is Mary's youngest son. He's 5 years old.
I felt a moment of panic. Fred comes up to me and I say, "Where's Tom?" And Fred says, "I sent him back to you."
Fred says Tom wasn't wearing shoes, and he complained his feet were hurting.
I sent him back to you just at the beginning of our trip. He was whiny and didn't seem to want to do the walk, and so I sent him back to you. He thought that Tom was more competent than he was. I would not have done that. Oh my God. Where's my child?
Mom! Help me! Where's everyone?
I remember just jumping up and starting to run around the lake, screaming for him.
They search frantically, backtracking their walk. Perhaps he's just hiding.
He was like a little imp, liked to play tricks on people. They were always busy doing something, building tree houses, exploring the fields. He was delightful.
But after 2 hours, no sign of Tommy. To add to their concern, a thunderstorm is moving in. They realize it's time to call the police.
By the time I arrived, Tommy had probably been missing 2 or 3 hours. It was probably somewhere around 4 or 5 o'clock by that time.
Dave Redsiger was a member of the local emergency squad in Spencer.
What we did was contacted all the surrounding fire departments.
I remember standing there and seeing the emergency vehicles beginning to arrive right down on the lawn. You know, they just bypassed the parking lot and they were setting up a command center down there on the lawn. It seemed like every car had a two-way radio going.
He's wearing a white t-shirt and a pair of plaid shorts.
I remember just regular people beginning to arrive. People standing in groups and being briefed and being told where to go.
Nobody seemed to see him around the campsite. Nobody seen him around the swim area. So you kind of narrow it down to 2 areas, the woods or the lake.
I look over, and they're bringing boats in. And that only means one thing.
A dive team goes into the water to search for Tommy.
Near the camping area was heavily dead woods, a lot of stumps, things that, if somebody got in there, they could very easily get entangled underneath the water and not be able to get back to the surface.
And I was just horrified. I was absolutely horrified. And I just wouldn't look at them. Absolutely didn't want to look at them.
The dive team searches the perimeter of the lake, but no sign of Tommy. The storm is getting worse.
Once the weather started to get bad and the lightning started getting pretty nasty, we had to call off the water search.
4 hours had passed since 5-year-old Tom went missing.
And by that time, it was pouring. It was just torrential. And I'm thinking about this little 5-year-old kid with a bathing suit on, out there in the cold rain, in the woods somewhere. And I'm just so scared for him.
8 miles away, in the town of Spencer, 25-year-old psychic Phil Jordan hears the news.
I ran across the backyard, and my landlord was standing in the back door, and she said a little boy was missing up at Empire Lake. She says they think he's in the lake and that he is drowned.
But out of nowhere, the psychic has a vision. He can see little Tommy.
I could see this little boy lying under a very large tree. That showed me that he was probably in the woods and probably not in the lake.
Is Tommy Kennedy still alive, lost in the woods? Is the psychic right? And will anyone listen? In upstate New York, a massive search is underway at Empire Lake for 5-year-old Tommy Kennedy, who vanished during a family picnic.
This little 5-year-old kid out there in the cold rain. And I'm just so scared for him.
The storm gets worse and day turns to night.
We really started getting some nasty storm weather coming in, and it blew in quite heavy. A lot of rain. And of course with that we got a lot of thunder and lightning, and it got quite cold.
The missing boy's father, Don Kennedy, a local reporter, arrives 8 hours after his son disappeared.
He had been out of town, and he had rushed to the lake.
Don begins frantically searching for his son, but now there's a new danger.
With the lightning and the thunder, we were really afraid of ending up with, more searchers lost besides the boy.
Redsicker has no choice. He calls off the search.
Intellectually understood, but my little 5-year-old is out there still by himself.
Tommy's parents are desperate. Don Kennedy remembers a piece he'd written about a local psychic. By coincidence, it's Phil Jordan.
My 5-year-old child was lost. As far as I was concerned, bring in the National Guard. Bring in anyone who will help search for him and find him.
I was not surprised that he called me. I felt that I might hear from some of the family. He was really pleading. He wanted me to come up to the lake at that time.
The psychic says he can help to find the missing boy, but not just yet.
I just knew that if I went there, I would become contaminated with everyone else's ideas and not follow my own self, my own psychic self. I remember saying to Don Kennedy, I'm really sorry, but I just can't come right now. I have to wait till daylight because I don't want to miss a clue that could help us to find him.
With the search called off, and the psychic refusing to come to the lake until daybreak, Mary Kennedy is losing hope.
I'm wondering if he's cold, wondering if he's scared. I wondered if he was dead.
A But back in Spencer, psychic Phil Jordan is already on the case.
I sometimes leaf through the Bible and just point to something. And there was a phrase, and it said something about the children going into the woods.
Suddenly, the psychic has a vision of exactly where to find Tommy. Although he's never been to Empire Lake, he begins to draw a map.
The first thing I knew was that down to my left, there would be 3 boats. And then I could see the building across the lake. And I knew I would have to go into the woods behind the building till we find a clearing. So I drew that all on the map.
But can this crudely drawn map lead to Tommy Kennedy? It's 5 a.m. The storm is over. Tommy Kennedy has been missing an agonizing 16 hours.
No parent should have to spend a night like that. I don't remember whether we ate supper, what we said to each other. It's blank.
Hundreds of volunteers from miles around gather at dawn to resume the search.
There were several fire trucks with personnel on them, at least 1 ambulance. We got the people together, told them what the boy's name was, and then had them search areas around the lake into the wooded areas, but we concentrated on the area immediately around the camping area and the bathing, swimming area.
I was just tremendously grateful that all these people just showed up.
Psychic Phil Jordan also arrives at the lake to help with the search.
I met Dave Redsicker, who was a friend of mine, but was the investigator in charge. Even I says, well, I have this map.
I was shocked. As simple as the map was, the things that he had drawn on the map were right there.
The 3 boats were there, exactly as I had drawn. And across, you could see a large tent. And I said, that has to be the building. We'll go in behind the tent.
But the searchers think he's wrong.
What he was describing was an area that we hadn't searched yet, because it was an area that we figured was the most remote area, or most unlikely area that this child would have gotten into.
But the psychic is confident his map will lead to the lost boy. Before he begins his search, the psychic makes an unusual request.
He asked me for an article of clothing that belonged to Tom. So I asked Phil Jordan if one of his little sneakers would be okay, and Phil said, absolutely.
His mom made sure I had that sneaker, and I tucked that into my belt, and I focused on Tommy Kennedy and finding him.
250 rescuers searched the south side of Empire Lake, the area closest to the spot where Tommy was last seen. Meanwhile, Phil Jordan and 2 volunteers, armed only with a psychic map and a little boy's shoe, head in the opposite direction.
There was myself and these 2 men that I didn't know.
I just wished them good luck, and they headed out into the woods.
25-year-old Phil Jordan has never tested his psychic powers in a life-and-death situation before, and he's never been to Empire Lake. But he has faith in his map.
I know we're going to find him, and we will find him within an hour.
Tommy!
Every little ways I would stop, and I'd say to myself, okay, we have to keep going straight. Now we have to turn left.
Tommy!
Now we have to go up here. We have to go a little bit to the right. And I remember talking to myself through the whole thing so I could block out any of the ideas that others had.
Tommy!
It was rugged terrain. There was a hiking path, but it was uphill. A lot of woods, a lot of trees falling across the path, and treacherous going.
Is it possible that a 5-year-old without shoes could have strayed so far? The psychic is now deep in the woods, 2 miles from where Tommy Kennedy disappeared. And so far, the psychic has turned up nothing. And now, one of the 2 men with him is starting to have doubts.
One of them kept saying, Everything you're describing is in another direction.
Yet hundreds of volunteers searching in the area where he should be can't find a trace of Tommy either.
Nothing. It was as if Tom had just vanished.
The psychic struggles to keep his vision.
And that's when I would refer to the map and hold on to his sneaker and say, Tommy, I'm coming, I'm gonna find you.
But now even the psychic starts to doubt his map.
I was all ready to say, well, maybe we should check that other area and come back here later today.
And then Phil Jordan makes a startling discovery. On the shores of Empire Lake in upstate New York, Mary Kennedy waits desperately for any news of her 5-year-old son Tommy, who's been missing for over 16 hours.
It was as if Tom had just vanished.
Hundreds of searchers comb the area around the lake where the boy disappeared, but with no luck. Yet 2 miles away, psychic Phil Jordan, following his crude map, has stumbled across a child's footprint.
It was right in front of me. I looked at that footprint and I thought, oh, we must be close, and I got goosebumps, you know.
That footprint convinces the psychic he's on the right track.
I said to the other searchers, now we have to find a clearing. It shouldn't be too far up here. So we continued on, and within moments we found the clearing. I just stood at the opening of the clearing and said to myself, okay, now which way do I have to go? I looked at it sort of as a clock, and I thought, we've got to go where the 11 is. And we went to that area, and there was another path through the woods.
As he climbs a gully, Phil falls behind the other searchers, but he can still hear them calling out Tommy's name. And then, an answer.
Help me! I'm over here!
I woke up to the sound of people calling my name.
Tommy! Tommy!
I started screaming, I'm over here, I'm over here.
The fellow who tried to talk me into going in the other direction, he says, I hear him yelling. He's yelling for help. And so they all ran in the direction that the voice came from.
I saw these men coming towards me with huge smiles on their face. I was very relieved that they had found me. Everybody was giving Phil Jordan congratulations. I could tell right away that he was the one that was responsible for locating me.
I just dropped there and knelt there and thanked God that he had given me this ability and cried. You know, I just sobbed. It was very emotional. He was worried that he had done wrong. He was worried that he was going to be reprimanded. And it was quite the opposite. Everybody was so thankful.
Tommy Kennedy had been missing more than 16 hours. One of the searchers reminds Phil about a prediction he had made.
He says, 58 minutes. And I says, what does that mean? And he says, you told me we'd find him within an hour, and it was 58 minutes after we started.
Tommy's rescuers carry him out to a nearby road.
They had walkie-talkies, and they radioed for help, and soon the ambulance came to a road that was not far from where Tommy actually was.
And the news that Tommy is safe is radioed back to the lake.
Someone comes up to me and tells me that Tom has been found. It's like heaven opened up. I was just so grateful. And almost instantly, there he is.
After almost 2 days of anguish, mother and son are reunited.
He says, I was camping, Mom. I slept next to a stick. It's a miracle. It's a miracle that he's found, and it's a miracle that he's okay.
Phil Jordan's visions had been right from the beginning. Tommy Kennedy hadn't gone near the lake. Instead, he had wandered deep into the forest.
I immediately started crying and whining as I was walking back, and I'm sure that contributed to me getting lost. I probably wasn't paying attention to the marks on the path. I just started running in circles, and Within a very short period of time, the clouds rolled in, and that first lightning bolt came down. Then I was terrified, and I started running and running and running.
Wet, scared, and exhausted, he remembered what his mother had taught him.
I taught my children standard safety, which is you don't go near the water when there's lightning. Find a sheltered place.
I came upon a sort of a clearing, and I found a nice large stick to fend off any attacking animals.
Phil had marked just such a clearing on his map.
I was completely exhausted by that time, so I didn't have any trouble at all falling asleep.
How could a psychic with a crudely drawn map succeed where 250 rescuers failed?
If it hadn't been for Phil, and his map and his abilities, we either wouldn't have found him for a long time or we may not have found him at all.
I'm certain that Phil Jordan saved Tom's life.
Word that Phil Jordan had found a lost boy using his psychic abilities is big news. Even the local sheriff, who is not in the habit of using the paranormal, recognizes his achievement.
And he says, I would like you to become deputized so that if we have other cases, you can work more freely with law enforcement.
So help me God.
At that time, Phil was the only deputized psychic that I was aware of in New York State.
Phil Jordan's amazing accomplishment at Empire Lake paved the way for psychics all over America to team up with police in solving difficult cases.
It was truly an honor to be deputized because at that time in history, psychics were just beginning to be used a little bit in police work.
It's now 32 years since psychic Phil Jordan found little Tommy Kennedy lost in the woods. They haven't seen each other since. Until today.
Good to see you. Well,
Phil still has the shoe that helped him to find Tommy so long ago.
I put it in my belt, and I'd say, okay, Tommy, tell me where you are. Do you remember that day?
I do. I remember running through the woods. I remember the lightning. I remember finding a stick to sleep with. I remember.
Wild bear.
Exactly. Yeah, like my 5-year-old with a stick is going to do something to a bear.
That's right.
But
well, you were using your head.
Yeah.
That's the best way you knew how.
Right. Yeah. And the next thing I remember is hearing you guys. I heard you calling for me and waking up.
It was that day that I proved my ability to myself. And from then on, no one's ever convinced me that I can't do what I do.
Without him, they might have been looking for my bones,
When a 42-year-old nurse is found bludgeoned to death, a small town in New Jersey is in shock.
It was a vicious attack.
Her hands were bound with an extension cord.
A minimum of 21 hits in the head.
I didn't have my mother to raise me anymore.
Police suspect her boyfriend, but a psychic says the killer is someone else.
I saw a man, saw a hammer, a tied-up woman in her bed.
Can a psychic's vision solve the mystery of who killed Betty Cornish?
The killer lives upstairs.
Belvedere, New Jersey, an hour away from New York City, but 1,000,000 miles away from big city crime, a town where neighbors trust each other and doors are seldom locked.
It's a very quiet town. Everybody knows everyone. It's just one of those small communities.
Basically, a little rural town that hadn't really changed over the decades.
Until August 8th, 1987. A frantic emergency call comes in from a man who says he's found his girlfriend dead. Kent Swigert, now chief of Belvedere Police, is the first on the scene.
I entered the apartment and observed a male standing in the living room. And this male said to me, "Is she dead?" So I walked into the bedroom and I observed a female lying face up in the bed. It was pretty obvious that she was killed.
The crime is so horrific that the Belvedere Police need help. Dave Heater of the Warren County Prosecutor's Office is assigned to the case.
It was a vicious attack. We had a minimum of 21 hits in the head. There was blood spattered 360 degrees on all four walls, the ceiling. There was blood pooled on the floor.
She was laying face up, her arms were behind her back, her hands were bound with an extension cord.
Her nightshirt was pulled up over her head.
Totally blood-soaked, along with the sheet around about her head that was also blood-soaked.
There was exposed bone, and extreme damage to the forehead.
The victim is 42-year-old Betty Cornish, a divorced mother with 5 grown daughters. She worked as a practical nurse.
She was a good mom. She liked to go out dancing, and she had a big circle of friends that she would go out with.
She had recently moved back to Belvedere to be closer to her family.
It was something I just couldn't believe. I was like, what do you mean, you know? What do you mean my sister's dead?
So vicious was the attack that at first police think she was killed by gunfire.
My sister Mary Beth called. She just said something happened and that they thought she was shot.
And I know I started going crazy that I wanted to go with her because I knew they were going to take her body to Newark for an autopsy. And I just kept saying, she's going to be alone, she's going to be alone, I want to be with her.
The autopsy report shows that Betty Cornish died of blunt force injuries consistent with a hammer attack.
When we started to find out from the autopsy reports that the claw end of the hammer was used and that it penetrated into the skull, it was gruesome.
This was an angry person. Whether it came as a result of a fight, whether the victim had fought with him, he was mad, angry at something, and he took it out on the victim.
The murder was so violent that the police assume Betty's neighbors must have heard something.
We're having a very difficult time. We're not getting anyone within the apartment complex that's giving us anything. There were no screams. There was nothing out of the ordinary, nothing unusual.
And apart from the vicious attack to the victim, there is nothing unusual in the apartment except for blood in the bathroom.
We found blood in the bathroom, and we found blood around the sink and also on the mirrors. We had made the assumption that our suspect had probably cleaned up there.
At first, it looks as if the killer came through the window, because the victim's window was removed and found leaning against the building. But a fingerprint found on the glass tells the police a very different story.
That fingerprint would have had to have been someone from the inside grabbing the window. The idea that if someone did jump in, they would have to grab a hold of the sill in order to pull themselves in. There would have had to been striations across that wooden sill from the body sliding across. There were no striations.
That leads police to believe Betty Cornish knew her killer.
We believe that that window was removed to draw us off because he was located so close to the victim.
So the police zero in on her boyfriend.
He found the body. He reported the crime. When we began to question him, he indicated that he had been out fishing that day. Some of the other investigators who were going around the apartment came into us to tell us that they found a set of clippers that a fisherman would typically use was located directly below the bedroom window of the victim. That became very suspicious to us because he said he had been fishing.
It was shocking, but I kind of thought that maybe it was the boyfriend because I didn't know Paul that well.
Could he be the one who removed the window?
We started questioning her boyfriend more and more, and honestly, I believe he got scared.
Before police can further question him, he stops talking.
He asked for an attorney at the time. So we couldn't talk to him any further, and his attorney advised him not to speak with us or cooperate with us at any point.
Now, after 3 days and no hard leads, the people in town are uneasy.
This was the first murder that Belvedere had experienced in really 80 to 100 years. The people in the immediate area of Blair House Apartments were very, very scared at the time. There was a crowd of people that had watched what was going on, and there was fear that there might be more people in danger.
Everything, my whole complete life changed overnight. I didn't have a place to live anymore. I didn't have my mother to raise me anymore. Nothing's ever normal again.
Residents in the apartment complex, eager to help the police, volunteer for polygraph tests, and they all pass. It seems as if the police have hit a wall.
The longer that a case goes on, your chances lessen greatly by the hour. It starts to scare you. There is a killer in the community, and you don't know where he is.
You imagine a monster. Only a monster could do something like that, and that's what we were afraid of. What kind of crazy person that could be out there?
I just wanted this person caught yesterday, you know. I remember calling the prosecutor's office. Did they find him yet? Did they find this person that killed my sister yet? That's when someone had told me about Nancy.
Nancy Weber is a psychic who claims to be able to see what most of us cannot.
It's not always in picture form. Sometimes it's sound, sometimes it's smells, sometimes it's vision, sometimes it's a feel, a fabric.
8 days after her sister's murder, Peggy calls psychic Nancy Weber and sets up a meeting.
And she didn't want to know anything. Nancy didn't want to know anything. And she took me into this room and we began to talk.
I felt this horrible, heartbreaking misery.
Without any knowledge of the case, the psychic claims to tune in to Peggy's loss.
Somehow that connected inside me with she had sustained a great and tragic loss of a family member. She had a sister who was murdered.
And then she says something amazing.
I said to her that the chief suspect is a boyfriend. She said, yes. I said, he is not the killer.
But can the psychic see who the real killer is?
I saw a hammer. I saw a tied-up woman in her bed. I saw her brutally murdered. And I thought, that's the killer.
In Belvedere, New Jersey, it's been 8 days since 42-year-old Betty Cornish was found bludgeoned to death in her bed.
There is a killer in the community, and you don't know where he is.
Her boyfriend, who found the body, isn't talking, and the police have few hard leads.
I just wanted this person caught yesterday, you know.
Desperate to find the killer, the victim's sister asks a psychic for help, and the psychic has a vision of the murder, a vision so horrific she feels she can only share it with the police.
I asked her to please contact the police involved. I said, let them speak with me, not you.
I received a call from Peggy Goebel. She told me that she had been talking to a woman who was a psychic. I'm skeptical, when a psychic calls up or says that they have psychic ability. I want to hear who it is and what they have to say before I'm going to put a lot of faith into that individual.
But in this case, it's Nancy Weber.
So I said, okay, now I'm listening.
The detective and the psychic have worked together before on other cases.
I would be more than happy to bring her to the scene and get her thoughts, her feelings on what occurred here, because we're now beginning to get into a week into this case and we're getting nowhere.
No sooner do the detective and the psychic arrive at the scene than Nancy has a vision that will turn the investigation upside down.
I looked upstairs and I saw a shadow. And I thought, that's the killer. He was going upstairs. He lives there. I pointed upstairs and said, the killer lives upstairs. I said, his first name's John, and last initial R.
She gave me the name John, and she gave me the initials JR.
The man upstairs is 30-year-old John Reese, a farm laborer who lives with his girlfriend and her 2 children.
He operated a piece of heavy equipment at the sod farm, just a working class individual.
And I said, well, I'm not real sure that's the right guy, Nancy. He already passed a polygraph.
Not only has John Reese passed a polygraph, but he has an alibi for the time police think Betty was murdered.
Based on what the condition of the body and what we knew at that time, we were guessing that the time of death would have been somewhere around midnight. John Reese was able to tell us pretty specifically where he was during the entire day, right up until the point of about 2 o'clock in the morning, and at that point he went to bed. He alibied himself pretty well.
I said, that doesn't matter. It was such a strong feeling and strong vision.
At that point in my mind, I was beyond Mr. Reese. He passed a polygraph. She said that she didn't care, that, polygraph him again, do what you have to do, but he's the guy.
Next, Detective Heater takes the psychic inside Betty Cornish's bedroom.
Crime scene hadn't been cleaned up. There was still blood spattered around. It was scary to walk in and not know what lay there.
As Nancy stands beside the victim's bed, she is hit with another vision.
Ben, I got the time of about 1:30 a.m. roughly.
Her vision puts the time of death much later than what the police say.
And this was one of the few times Dave actually responded to me and said, no, it was earlier. I said, no, wrong, because I had a very strong impression of a time, and I had a very strong impression of a murderer.
Could the psychic be right? Could the killer be John Reese?
She made me think more. Like, I knew he was a suspect, but I was a suspect. Everybody was. So when she kept pushing it is when I started to believe it.
They found it past the polygraph. She knew that he still did it.
He was there when the police arrived. He was there when the detectives arrived. He was there when they removed the body. And he was just there. Every time someone would look, there was John Reese.
It's the psychic's final vision that turns the investigation on its head.
I see this blur of a metallic buckle that I am told in my mind is a Western belt buckle that has meaning and value to John Reese.
Heater sends an investigator to see if Nancy is right.
Reese, in fact, had the belt buckle and was very consistent with everything that Nancy had described.
With this new piece of information, Detective Heater goes out on a limb and takes a second look at the man upstairs.
I, as a supervisor, at least now at this point, had some kind of justification in my own mind for spending man-hours on a man who already passed a polygraph.
He decides to take a gamble on a psychic's vision.
My boss basically told me I was crazy.
Heater sends detectives to question Reese again.
Reese was very comfortable with these two detectives and was willing to talk to them every day. They became almost like friends. And because of that investigative bond, Reese started talking about more things.
Detective Tom Trainer was one of the officers investigating Reese.
He gave information that caused us to believe that he might have been in the victim's apartment. It wasn't a real credible account of how or why he was in there, and of course, meanwhile, one of our ID men had developed, the latent prints off the front window.
11 days after the murder, the first solid piece of damning evidence. The fingerprint belongs to John Reese.
Trainer went after Reese again and told him, look, we've got your fingerprint on the window. What's the story? Oh, well, we're friends, Betty and I would come down there and, the window would get stuck. So, I would help her unjam the window to get it closed.
John Reese said that he was there to fix the window, and the window never got stuck. He had to put a stick underneath it to hold it up because it wouldn't stay stuck.
Another break. The medical examiner revises the time of death. Betty Cornish didn't die at midnight as the police thought. She died much later.
We got results back from the medical examiner's office, which gave us a time of death more into the early morning hours.
Just as the psychic told police at a time when Reese has no alibi.
The biggest problem that we had was the time period in the 3 o'clock to 3:30 in the morning area. We felt that there was something he was holding back.
We had his fingerprint from inside the apartment. We knew that he was lying to us at this point in time.
But the police have to make a case that will stand up in court. They need the murder weapon. Can the psychic help?
I saw a swamp, and so I told him, this is where you'll find the hammer.
Thanks to a psychic's vision. Police in Belvedere, New Jersey now have a prime suspect in the brutal killing of a 42-year-old nurse.
I pointed upstairs and said, the killer lives upstairs.
But they don't have enough hard evidence to arrest him. They need the murder weapon, and the psychic claims she knows where it is.
I suddenly saw this small body of messy, muddy water and the hammer falling into it. I thought, he dropped it in there.
Nancy, when she returned to our office, she drew us a map.
Took a piece of paper and drew my crude map and handed it to them and said, this is where you'll find the hammer.
She gave us a road, she gave us a patch that she said were woods, and she said, and over in this corner is water. And she said, I see Reese throwing the hammer into the woods.
But she can't tell the police where that water is located. At the same time, detectives continue to badger their prime suspect, determined to find cracks in his story.
He was able to give detailed information about, when he made the coffee, when he got up in the morning to go to work, and what time he left for work. But then the time when we felt that the victim was murdered was a time that he didn't recall. He just breezed right over it.
Reese started talking about more things. And those things that he kept adding into his statement during the times was things that were off, that were not talked about before.
There's a lot of little things that he changes in his behavior between, deep breaths. You could tell something is bothering him. And we just felt at that point that he was ready to tell us something.
Detectives make their move. They bring Reese in.
We hit him with all the things that we knew, walked around the table, sat down next to him, looked him in the eye, and said, John, we know you did it, and you know you did it. Now why don't you tell us about it? Approximately 20 to 25 minutes, perhaps half an hour later, Detective Traynor came out of that room and advised us that he had confessed to the murder.
I believe he knew that we knew that he was the killer, and for some reason he had to share that with us. It's hard to picture why or how, but something made him realize that, it was wrong and that he had to trust us and that he did it and he had to admit that.
There was a hammer on the floor that I picked up, and I hit her once in the head with it. I hit her 2, 3, 4 times with the hammer. Large amount of blood flowed on the bed, some on the walls. And I went upstairs. Garbage bag. Washed up my hand and everything. Had another beer and that's it.
Later, he told the police he dumped the hammer at the farm where he works.
When we did the search through the woods and we came out, there was the water in front of us. Water where Nancy said there would be water. We went in, we recovered the hammer, photographed it, brought it out, bagged it, tagged it, and put it into evidence.
18 days after beating Betty Cornish to death, John Reese is charged with her murder.
And I remember just my mother and father and I embracing and jumping up and down, happy that they caught him, but realizing that it just wouldn't bring her back.
Despite the confession, Reese later pleads not guilty. At the trial, his lawyers suggest Betty Cornish invited Reese into her apartment.
It was very hard because we would have to sit and see the murderer there every day.
A lot of the time, Mr. Reese basically propped his head on his hand and just seemed somewhat disinterested for the most part. He didn't want to show any expression to the jury, So he just basically sat like he was bored.
And he would, constantly turn his head and look at us. I remember my mother being there, and she was crying. It was hard for her to hold back her cries, and they wanted to put her out of the room. They didn't want the jurors to see my mother crying because it would sway their decision.
The jury doesn't believe John Reese's story. What they do believe is that sometime around 3 a.m., Reese came downstairs and snuck into Betty Cornish's apartment, bound her wrists with an extension cord, sexually assaulted her, and beat her to death, striking her at least 21 times with a hammer. After a 5-week trial, Reese is found guilty of all 11 charges, including first-degree murder. He is sentenced to 110 years.
I would like him to say he was sorry. I would like him to show some remorse because he never has. I think that if he were to say anything, that he would try to hurt us in some way because he is sick enough. He got 2 life sentences. He's eligible for parole in 45 years. So that means that he will be 72.
Or dead.
Or dead. And we will fight so that he dies in prison.
Why was the psychic so convinced that it was the man upstairs who killed Betty Cornish? He had already passed a lie detector test, yet she remained adamant her vision was correct. She knew his initials were J.R. and his first name was John. She also knew that he wore a large Western-style belt buckle. She even directed the police toward the murder weapon.
Nancy was probably one of the driving forces that kept me going back to Reese. I was willing to give him up, but she was very insistent.
Any constructive thing I can do assists Elizabeth and her soul and assists her family.
And whether you want to call it spiritual matter, whatever it is that a psychic sees, you've got to be able to believe in it. There's science, there may be the supernatural. I don't know how to explain what a psychic does, how they do it. All I know is it works.
When a woman's body washes up on a Florida beach, no one is more shocked than the police.
I have never in my life seen anything like this before.
The Navy thinks her husband's best friend is the killer, but a psychic disagrees.
The man's innocent.
How many times can you say, it wasn't me, I didn't do anything?
A psychic connects with the dead.
He's going to kill him.
Will her message be enough to save an innocent man from life in prison? On the northeast coast of Florida, Jacksonville is home to the Mayport Naval Station, the 3rd largest U.S. naval base in the world.
We live in a large military town, and we had 2 aircraft carriers, and you could tell when they were out to sea, that was 10,000 people gone from your population.
On the morning of March 26, 1988, 2 fishermen make a grisly discovery. They find a body washed up on the Intercoastal Waterway.
They thought it was a dolphin. They thought it was a fish that had washed up on the beach.
Dave Archer is a detective with the Atlantic Beach Police. When he arrives at the scene, he immediately knows this is no simple drowning.
I could tell it was that of a white female. Her hands were tied behind her back with a fishing stringer. And I thought, okay, that's odd.
She's identified as 22-year-old Anita Lukander. She had been reported missing by her co-workers at the Navy base 9 days earlier.
She was in my duty section, and she didn't show up for work. And in the Navy, you show up for work.
Peter Johnstone was a co-worker and a close friend of the Lukanders. When he'd realized Anita was missing, and knowing her husband was away at sea, he and fellow workers began a citywide search.
I mean, everybody, we all gotten worried. I mean, even the Navy had gotten hold of her husband, Bill, who was, I believe, down in Guantanamo Bay at the time.
My chief brought me down to the chief's mess and actually spent about 4 hours with me talking and settling me down. And I won't forget that night.
The autopsy suggests Anita's body had been in the water for 9 days. She was gagged with a white t-shirt. She had been strangled and her body had been mutilated.
I said, do you think she was raped? And he said, I can't tell. I said, what do you mean you can't tell? He said, all that's been surgically removed. And I thought, what?
The medical examiner also notes that her left ear had been cut off.
I told my boss, I said, look, I am entirely out of my league on this one. I have never in my life seen anything like this before.
Because of the shocking nature of the crime, they call in both state and federal law enforcement agencies, including the FBI.
Atlantic Beach at the time was a small town, a small police force. I don't think they were used to homicide investigations. And honestly, I don't think it was really taken seriously until Anita's body was found.
When investigators initially searched the Lucander home, the front door was unlocked.
There was no sign of forced entry. Just looked like a normal apartment. I'm thinking we got another missing military wife. You know, she's probably took off with somebody, or who knows.
3 days later, Anita's truck was found parked at a local bar just 4 miles from the house. When Bill Lucander arrives home from sea, he notices right away that something is wrong. Some of his guns are missing from his cabinet. Police immediately check pawn shops in the area, and one dealer says someone tried to sell him the stolen guns. A composite sketch of the suspect is made, but it leads nowhere and is filed away.
We started out with everybody was a suspect. In fact, the insurance company called me and said, we're fixing to pay off on the Lucander case, but we want to know if the husband is a suspect, because if he is, we're not going to pay. And I told him, I said, lady, at this point, he's the only one that's not a suspect, and the reason he's not is because he was out of the country.
A month later, a bizarre discovery. A mailman finds Anita's wallet. Sitting on top of it, a cold glass of water. No fingerprints are found on the wallet or the glass.
We took that as like a sign saying, okay, you guys are getting cold. You're headed in the wrong direction. You need to go back the other way.
The next day, Anita's purse is discovered blocks away from the Lucander home and on the same street as Bill's best friend, Peter Johnstone. Friends say that Johnstone spent a lot of time at the Lucander home, especially when his good friend Bill was away at sea.
Well, when Bill was gone, yeah, I would hang out over there. It wasn't not hardly as much as I did when Bill was there.
To investigators, Johnstone is beginning to look suspicious.
Every time you turn around, bam, Peter Johnstone standing right there looking at you. How's it going, guys? Is there anything I could do for you? No, we're on an active homicide investigation right now. There's nothing you can do for us, unless you did it.
Peter takes 2 polygraph tests. The first is inconclusive. The second one he passes.
I never felt concerned that they were investigating me. I never felt concerned with that. Always anything I could do to help.
Peter remains a suspect, but with no new witnesses, no physical evidence, the police don't have enough to make a case.
Everything was circumstantial. There was no smoking gun. There was no fingerprint to say, this is this and this is that. Just couldn't do it.
9 months after Anita was murdered, police are still no closer to catching her killer.
We pretty much hit a dead end.
The Anita Lucander case goes cold. 7 years pass without a single lead, and Anita's brutal killer is still out there.
Between 1988 and 1995, I was very frustrated, angry. I was still basically living and working with the same group of folks, and pretty much realized that, there was probably somebody in that group that had killed Anita.
Then, in 1995, the Naval Criminal Investigation Services sets up a cold case unit, and the Anita Lukander case starts to warm up again. They go back to the original suspect list from 1989. At the top is Peter Johnstone, who is now married with 2 children and no longer in the Navy. 2 agents visit him in his home in Maryland.
You know, they just want to ask me a few questions, and the case had been brought back up, and just in a split second it turned ugly, and they said, "You did it. We know you did it. You're the one, and you better tell us now." And once again, I was just flabbergasted.
Investigators grilled Johnstone for a full 3 days. Now, in a dramatic turnaround, they believe they have the evidence they need to nail him. He's taken into custody and held for 30 days, until the Florida Duval County Grand Jury indicts the former Navy squadron member for the murder of Anita Lukander. Mimi Hannon, an investigator for the Public Defender's Office, is assigned the case.
We had a man that probably didn't commit this homicide, and it was our job to prove that.
For the defense, 7 years after the murder, it was going to be tough going. So breaking with convention, they turned to a psychic for help. But could a psychic's cryptic clues help save Peter Johnstone from life in prison? It's been 7 years since Anita Lukander's mutilated body washed up on the Intercoastal Waterway in Jacksonville, Florida. Her co-worker, former Navy Petty Officer Peter Johnstone, is charged with murdering his best friend's wife.
How many times can you say, it wasn't me, I didn't do anything?
There was no physical evidence really linking Peter to the crime. The only thing that linked him to Anita Lukander was his friendship with her, his business acquaintanceship with her, and his friendship with her husband.
Ann Finnell and Pat McGinnis are Peter Johnstone's public defense lawyers.
Perhaps Peter Johnstone was an easy person to focus in on because he was cooperative with them.
The most damning evidence the Navy had was a supposed verbal confession given by Peter Johnstone during their 3-day interrogation of him in Maryland.
After I was arrested, I spent 30 days in Maryland jail awaiting paperwork from Florida because I was arrested under a fugitive from justice for murder. And when I got to Florida is when I met my attorney, Pat McGinnis, and they said that I had confessed. And what are you talking about? I didn't confess to anything. I kept telling them no for 2.5 days. And apparently they had this whole confession that they wrote up. Nothing I wrote up, nothing I signed, nothing I said, nothing.
The false confession that Peter ultimately gave was, basically, if I'd have done this, here's what I would have done.
Naval investigators contend that Peter Johnstone made advances to Anita, which she rejected. Angry, he strangles her, panics, and steals the guns from the cabinet to make it look like a burglary. He then dumps the guns and Anita Lukander's body off the bridge into the Intercoastal Waterway.
Most people don't believe that anyone would ever confess to something they didn't do. Those instances where interrogations last for long periods of time, the likelihood of a false confession is real. And in Peter Johnstone's case, this went on for 3 days.
Now it's up to the defense team to build a case for Peter Johnstone's innocence. Investigator Mimi Hannon's task is to go back 7 years to the original 1988 investigation.
Law enforcement in this case botched up an investigation tremendously. And it was a cold case. So you're going back and witnesses forget and people die and they move. And it's just really hard to reconstruct a real solid defense from something that happened so long ago.
To bolster their case, Hannon makes an unusual suggestion.
It occurred to me that law enforcement utilizes psychics. The government has utilized psychics. And back in the 90s, people weren't very forthcoming about using psychics to help them solve mysteries. When I first mentioned to Pat and Ann that I had a psychic friend and I would like to run the case by her and see if she had any feedback, they were very skeptical. Patrick almost did it, I felt, just to humor me. But I wasn't going to put my professional reputation on the line. I believed in Sharon's ability. and was looking forward to using it.
Sharon Johns is a psychic who lives in Gainesville, Georgia. She says her psychic ability comes from a higher being.
I always pray to work from that highest level. And by doing that, the angels and the guides do come and stand with you because you're working in that light. I ask for extremely accurate information for those that I read for this day. When I get information, it just comes in words, just kind of quick words, or in a video, or just in kind of symbols.
Hannon and the psychic are friends, but they've never worked together until now.
I do all of my work over the phone because I prefer to be in my space. If I'm sitting beside a person, I have to move away from them. And I'm just more comfortable to do phone work. I don't care if the person lives next door. I'll say, no, call me on the phone. Because that way, my energy is more clear. Sure,
When Mimi calls Sharon Johns, she has no knowledge of the case and asks Mimi not to give her any.
She wanted to know the victim's name and date of birth and Peter's name and date of birth. And that's all I gave her.
Immediately before she could even get his name out, I said, the man's innocent.
She told me that Peter would be found innocent and that the jury would come back in with an acquittal in March.
When I look at different aspects of what's going on, things just come immediately. With this case, it was just like a TV reel, just taking place.
Then Sharon inexplicably hones in on a curious clue.
I keep getting this about a composite somewhere. And you really need to see if somebody can find it.
How could Sharon know about the 7-year-old long-lost composite, the sketch of the man who tried to sell the stolen guns? And why does she think it's so significant?
The composite had not been found yet. We had so many volumes of discovery to go through that we intentionally had to start searching through the discovery boxes. And we eventually did find it. It was there, just as she said. I came back to the office the next morning, and Pat wanted to know what the psychic said. And his eyes got big as saucers.
There were views she had about the case and expressed that we were quite frankly puzzled as to how she could have arrived at those without a more intimate knowledge of the case than she had.
We had Pat's attention. He was going to take her more seriously than he had.
Sharon Johns was suggestive that this was, in fact, the person who was Anita Lukander's killer.
And the composite picture doesn't look anything like Peter Johnstone.
When I first saw the police sketch of the composite, I don't think it looked like me at all. One, I think the person had hair. And I'd like to show you some pictures of me back then. I haven't lost much hair since, in 20 years. And not to mention, I'm not wearing my glasses now, but back then I always wore glasses. So, without bumping into a wall, didn't look a lot like me at all.
As we began to work on the case and went further and further into things, then I saw more and more.
Patrick had asked me to ask Sharon a series of questions. He wanted them tape recorded so that it would be the exact words of Sharon Johns. During my conversation, her voice started to go from her own voice to the voice of somebody else.
As well as seeing visions, Sharon claims she is a channeler. It's a phenomena that allows spirits to communicate with the living.
It was really sort of a surprise to me, too, in that I wasn't really, what you're saying, preparing for this.
The voice was very high-pitched. It sounded like a little girl's voice. He's going to kill me. I don't know where Sharon went, but I was talking to somebody else.
Can a psychic channeling the voice of a dead woman help change the course of justice? A sailor accused of killing his best friend's wife is about to go on trial.
You did it. We know you did it. You gotta be kidding me.
When a psychic is asked to help on the case, she says he's innocent.
It's like I saw the whole thing just unfold, like a video.
And now, in one of her sessions, she claims to channel the voice of the murder victim, Anita Lukander.
She started talking in first person about the crime, and she walked me through the crime as it happened.
When I'm really into a trance channel, I am moved completely out of the way, to the point that I don't have any idea of what is being said. Mimi tells me that it was a high-pitched little voice. She sounded like a little child.
The voice sounded scared and frightened and had expressed that to me, that she was held for days, and he would leave her there alone for hours at a time, bound. And she knew that he was going to kill her. And I'll never forget the last words this voice said was, "And then it was done." And I took that to mean, and then he killed me. I'd never been a part of something like that before. So at that point, I went over to jail, and I pulled Peter out. And I said, Peter, what's did Anita sound like? And he said, you couldn't mistake in her voice. She sounded just like a little girl.
It's like she is the one that showed me herself in that shack that she was in. And by her coming through and actually speaking was amazing, in that the people that were listening to it heard it, but the recording didn't record it.
There was nothing on it but static, and there was a lot of distortion on the tape.
If the psychic's revelations are accurate, Anita was held captive for several days before being tossed into the waterway. And if this is true, the prosecution's contention that her body had been in the water 9 days must be false.
When we looked at the autopsy results and the photographs, both Mr. McGinnis and I were very suspicious of the body having been in the water for that full 9-day period. And the reason being is that in the intercoastal waterway, even in March, there's a lot of crab activity.
To prove their theory, the defense team order a crab test at the same location where Anita's body was found. In the experiment, raw chicken is used in place of human flesh and is placed at the bottom of the river for 9 days.
While that body is on the bottom especially, it would be attacked by crabs and other animals that are in the water as well. This body had none of that kind of activity.
If crabs didn't ravage Anita's body, it could only mean that she was not in the waterway for the full 9 days. This contradicts the Navy's contention that Peter killed Anita and dumped her body that same night. It makes the so-called confession meaningless and amazingly vindicates the word of a psychic. February 18th, 1997. Almost 9 years after Anita Lukander's brutal murder, Peter Johnstone goes on trial.
Peter was definitely fearful facing trial because he was looking at a life sentence. He had been behind bars for almost 20 months by the time it had gone to trial.
But just as the trial gets underway, the psychic makes an unusual request.
Mimi called me and she says, is there anything else that we need to do? We're going to trial. I said, just be sure that you've got that composite. I said, it's very important. I don't know why, but you've got to take it.
We had no idea where she was going with that and what the significance would be.
Anne Fennell enters the composite sketch into evidence, and it will prove to be pivotal.
Trials don't always end up like you want them to end up. It is an incredible nerve-wracking experience, much more so than if you're going to trial with someone who you either know or think is guilty.
After a 3-week trial, the jury begins their deliberations. Just 2 hours in, the jury requests to see the composite sketch of the man who pawned the guns once again.
And we found out there was one holdout in that jury room who wanted to take a closer look at Peter Johnstone.
1 hour later, the jury reaches a verdict.
My heart was, coming out of my chest, and you're just sitting there, and the judge takes a piece of paper, and he reads it, and I'm like, okay. And then he folds it back up, and he hands it back.
It was a real nail-biter for a few minutes until the jury was seated, and the clerk read the verdict.
With the jury found the defendant not guilty.
A not guilty verdict in the death of his best friend's wife, Anita Lukander, who was raped, strangled, and mutilated in 1988. On March 17th, 1997, just as the psychic predicted, Peter Johnstone walked out of the Jacksonville courtroom a free man. How did the psychic know so much? She said that the key to Peter's defense lay in the composite sketch. She predicted that he would be free in March, and she correctly predicted that Anita had not been thrown straight into the water after the murder, as the prosecution stated.
Sharon's contribution to the case had become huge. She invigorated the defense team. We were on a certain defense theories that was what Sharon was seeing too.
It got him looking at other avenues and justifying what she had said. It was great. So I think good chance she saved my life.
Today, 21 years after Anita Lucander was murdered, Sharon Johns and Peter Johnstone meet for the first time.
You look good. You look good. It has. Oh. It's so, you're welcome. You're welcome. Oh. Doing this work is a big responsibility. I have simply just learned to trust. And what I see, I give. I can't give them any more than what I see or what I hear.
To date, the cold-blooded killer of Anita Lucander has never been brought to justice.
She was my wife. She's a daughter. She was a sister, an aunt, and there's only really one person that knows what happened to Anita, and that person needs to come forward and put this to rest. And if he's not man enough to do that, personally, I hope his life's a living hell.